I think we're going to go ahead and get started here today. My name is Vanessa Davis, and I am the chair of the ICA Youth Committee. And I wanted to go ahead and, on behalf of the ICA Youth Committee, welcome all of you to our fourth event in the Spring Workshop Series. In a moment, we'll go ahead and introduce our guest artist panelists, but we wanted to take a moment to thank the International Clarinet Association and its board for the opportunity to create and present these workshops, as well as Jessica Harry and Jenny McClay for their help and support. During the discussion, feel free to use the chat function to ask questions, and I will go ahead and interrupt the clinicians as we go. But we really are excited to present these workshops because they fit directly into the mission of the Youth Committee, which is to more directly engage the pre-professional membership of the middle school students, high school students, and all level of collegiate students through initiatives specifically designed for them, such as these workshops. We want to also welcome all suggestions and encourage you to complete the workshop feedback poll that I've already posted the link to in the chat. It is my pleasure now to introduce Mariah Tunison, the coordinator of the subcommittee that organized the April workshops, to introduce our guest artist panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're very thrilled today to have this workshop on auxiliary clarinets, a wonderful topic, and we're going to hear from two wonderful workshop panelists today. So we have Jorge Montilla, the assistant professor of clarinet at the University of Iowa, founding member and artistic director of the Caracas Clarinet Quartet. And he has performed recitals in Venezuela, USA, throughout Europe, and also has been appearing as a soloist in several of those countries as well, an amazing E-flat clarinetist. And then we have on bass clarinet today will be Cheyenne Cruz, the adjunct assistant professor of applied clarinet at the University of Texas at Arlington, the second clarinetist of the Texarkana Symphony Orchestra, bass clarinetist of Longview Symphony Orchestra, and South Arkansas Symphony Orchestra as well. So thank you so much for agreeing to be here, and we're super thrilled to have you. And we've already decided to go in score order, so we're going to start with E-flat clarinet, of course. So I will pass it over to Dr. Montilla.
Thank you, Moria and Vanessa and the ICA and Jessica for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here on this sunny day in Iowa City. Sadly, I'm in my basement, but I guess we'll be able to enjoy some of the sunshine later today. I was asked to talk about the E-flat clarinet, the instrument that we all love and hate. Is that one of those love-hate relationships? And I'm sharing my screen here, so I have some talking points. One of them is starting the E-flat clarinet beginnings. And I wanted to talk about this because sometimes in different countries, sometimes the different clarinet teachers, they recommend the little kids to start with the E-flat clarinet. So I think that it was good sometimes. It wasn't too disrupting when the students got the B-flat clarinet or the soprano clarinet after that. But for some reason, maybe because the E-flat clarinets are not available easily, and they might be actually more expensive than the B-flat clarinet, than the soprano clarinet. That this custom of starting kids with the E-flat clarinet like kind of fell into disuse. So nowadays we just wait a little bit until the kids are a little bit bigger, their hands are a little bit bigger, so they can start right away with the B-flat clarinet. So I'm gonna talk about myself. I started on the B-flat clarinet. I was a rather big kid when I was 10 years old. So my teacher told me that I could start directly on the big B-flat clarinet and not have to play the E-flat clarinet. So it wasn't until I was in the professional orchestra that my orchestra said, okay, you need to play the bass clarinet in the next concert. And then I went to the deposit of the instruments of the orchestra, and I got a bass clarinet, and I put it together and I played it, and I played in the concert, and it was quite successful. So for several concerts, including a recording and a tour, I played the bass clarinet. But then the orchestra had an infra clarinet uh, piece, and a piece that had an infra clarinet. So the managers of the orchestra contacted me and said, "Have you ever played the infra clarinet?" And I say, "No, but I'm willing to try." So they say, "Okay, next week we have a piece that has the infra clarinet. You want to try to play it?" So I went to the same deposit and got the infra clarinet, and then I put it together and I play in the concert of the orchestra, and it was quite successful too. So then when I went up for the principal of clarinet of the orchestra, and I had to audition for that. So after I won the audition, they say, "Okay, you are the new principal, but you need to pick one of these two instruments. It's going to be your accessory instrument," which means that that you will be the principal with the obligation to play the either the bass clarinet or the E flat clarinet. And I decided the E flat clarinet for me. And I must say that I decided because it was a smaller case, and even though it was a higher instrument, I thought that I was a little bit more shallow, and because of this, I chose the E flat clarinet because the case was a little bit smaller and it was easy to carry. So at that time, I started working also with the Caracas Clarinet Quartet, and I decided that I was gonna play the E flat clarinet in any of that wonderful music that has E flat clarinet that is written for clarinet quartets. So this is my specific beginnings with the E flat clarinet. So it wasn't given to me, it was suggested to me to play it. And I know that sometimes some band directors they will come to specific players and they say, well, there is a band piece that requires E flat clarinet. Do you want to play it? And students sometimes they feel, yes, I want to at least try it. Sometimes they feel that they are required to do it, and the truth is that at least you should have an encounter with the accessory instruments to see which one you are more, I don't know, I want to say suitable for. So uh, it's not a surprise that you end up playing the E flat clarinet or the bass clarinet, but a consequence of something that you like the feeling, and maybe that you have the disposition to play it. So, as speaking about disposition and talents and all of this, which is very subjective, I am quite tall, so maybe I should play the contrabass clarinet, but I play the one of the smallest instruments. So don't let any of these boxes put you in the obligation to play one or instrument or another one. Okay, so to continue, I'm going to talk about the bad reputation. And this is also something that we struggle with as IFRA clarinet players, is that everybody seems to love the clarinet, the B flat clarinet, the soprano clarinet, the B flat, the A clarinet, and most people, and I mean regular audiences and also other musicians, they seem to love the bass clarinet very much. They seem to love the timbre and also the range. So then we have the E flat clarinet that everybody kind of frowns upon, is because they say, when I used to ask my friends, so why do you hate the E flat clarinet? And the first thing they say, is too squeaky, is too high, is too piercing a sound, and is too out of tune. So I thought, well, that is what we have to fight against, just to change that, those tendencies or those natural responses coming out of the infra clarinet for something that is the opposite. So because of that, I always try to play the infra clarinet with a softer sound, with a warmer sound, which is contrary to the loud and piercing and brassy sound that people, regular people, and other musicians hate about the clarinet. Now, intonation, I'm gonna speak about intonation a little bit later because I discovered a few things about the E flat clarinet that make a difference when we play. So my next talking point is B flat clarinet and E flat clarinet. So I have both here, and they are pretty similar. So of course there is a size difference, but the fingerings are about the same. The hands go in the same way and cover the same basic holes and keys. And also, I try to feel that the E flat is a continuation of the B flat clarinet. So if I play, so the continuation to that, which I also have here, I also have it on the B flat, but I can also have it on the, I also have it on the E flat clarinet. So I think that in terms of how similar or different uh, they are similar in which they are two clarinets with the same kind of keyboard and the same kind of the hands go in the same places, the upper hand and the lower hand, the right hand and left hand. So it's similar, and also they also have a mouthpiece and a single reed attached by the ligature. So it's just a smaller version. Uh, but compared to the B flat, the E flat has us, because it has to play in the higher notes, then the voicing is a little bit a continuation of the B flat voicing, which is a little bit smaller in the front of the mouth, and it could be a little bit bigger in the back of your throat or the last part of your tongue for the high note. So I'm trying to, and one thing that I found that is very important for the E flat clarinet is that even though the embouchure is about the same, with the lower lip covering the lower teeth and the upper teeth against the mouthpiece, even though those things are similar, I try for the E flat clarinet to use more my corners and to bite the reed less. So instead of doing, I try to do more. And I don't know how much you can appreciate through the Zoom connection, the internet connection, and all of this, but where I am, there's a considerable change in timbre from where it's more like I'm biting and I'm having steady back of my lower lip, or when I do, which is when I use more corners and less biting. So this could bring for the clarinet and also for the E flat intonation issues, because we need some amount of biting to produce the actual pitch in the higher notes. So we need not to abandon that idea, but we need to have exactly the amount of biting that we need and not more. And we need to also use the corners of our lips to keep the intonation steady where it's supposed to be without going flat, and also the sound to be nice and warm and a little bit darker. So this is all about the embouchure, the use of lips, and the use of the voicing. So I try to explain this for the B flat clarinet and also for the E flat, that our ears are very important, because I hear the note and in the timbre I can perceive already if I'm biting too much, or if I'm not biting enough. So this is a personal thing, and we have to go by the result. But it is a constant fight with the E flat for it not to go too loud, too bright, or too piercy and too out of control. So always try to, I call it, sweeten the sound, to make it sweet, to make it darker. So it's all about this. When if you will play a violin or a string instrument, you will have the bow, and the speed makes a different sound. The amount of pressure down makes a different sound. How much are you tighten this flesh will make a different sound too. And where in the string you have the friction will make different sounds, will change slightly the timbre of the violin or of the string instruments. So for the clarinet, we want to believe that only one thing is enough for everything, and it's not. In that case, what we achieve is one steady sound that works for many notes, but some other notes are not to favor with this kind of a sound production setup. So now I'm going to go with the reed strength. And this is very interesting because I have my two instruments here. I'm going back and forth. This instrument, the B flat, I play with a reed number 4, and the E flat, I play with a reed number 3.5. So I want to have this reed slightly softer than this reed. And part of it also gives me the possibility to play with a darker sound, even though naturally we want to think that a harder reed will give us a darker sound, but because I'm using more lips and less biting, then I can control it, and the result will be a sound that is slightly darker and covered. So I'm trying to play with a nice and warm air. I'm trying to voice like I'm voicing a B flat clarinet. So not too open, not too close. in the back, and as I go higher, I have more of the lips pressuring the corners and less biting, because if not, I just choke the reed. Okay, so one thing about moving on to the articulation, one thing that it's important, this is important also for the clarinet. We don't articulate all the notes the same. Even if you want to believe that the articulation is a mechanical fact that you do like this, no matter where you are in the register, no matter uh, the dynamic, we if we are successful already with articulation, we naturally articulate differently different registers. So I think that when I articulate the lower notes, I articulate more less of the tip of my tongue and a little bit lower in the reed. And I also use more strength. But as I go higher, then I start going higher in the reed, and I go more to the tip. So the last thing I play has almost no friction with the reed with the tongue, and it's more air. So I'm playing almost touching just a little bit of the tip to the tip of the reed, not like this, but just like this, and a little bit more the tip. So also for the E flat clarinet, this is an important tip that many times, especially in the higher notes, instead of starting with the tongue, I start with the air. I start and then I do a combination of more air than tongue. So it gives me that kind of easy beginning and with all the friction of the tongue. So this is better when I do that I instead of doing what I will do as I go higher, I use more of a ha starting of the note. Even if it's a short note, so I will. I sometimes I relate that to like throwing darts. You go like boop, 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 boop. Okay, so now I'm going to go to talk a little bit about intonation, and yes, I put height of keys and pads and fingerings. So many times the E flat clarinet is out of tune. So, and some of the natural tendencies of the instruments, like if in this specific clarinet brand, the C is flat, the E flat clarinet will be even flatter. And if the D is sharp, then the E flat clarinet will be even sharper. So some are accentuated natural tendencies, and some are contrary. So a note that is sharp on the B flat clarinet will be flat on the E flat clarinet. So we need to talk about and find different fingerings. For example, if you saw me playing the E, I don't play, I play this because it's higher. So in the B flat clarinet, we used to play, we used to use that E because it tunes okay. But for the E flat clarinet, I do, and just like that, I usually use this F or directly the overblown A, depending on what I'm playing. So usually I don't use those the regular fingerings of the B flat clarinet usually don't work. So when I'm playing too much of the E flat clarinet and I go back to the B flat clarinet, I see and I feel that I'm using fingerings, and then they have a different response. Another thing that's important is how much your keys go up. So I learned this from somebody who was playing E flat clarinet in a professional American orchestra, and told me that most of the intonation issues of the E flat clarinet can be fixed by just regulating the pads. So I can see, I need to see here. So as you can see, this one is all regulated by this one. So I try to keep it so this one doesn't open too much. So if I play a B natural, so in many clarinets, many E flat clarinets, this B is extremely sharp. So sometimes it's because this key here is opening too much. So once I got this to open as it was supposed to, then it was great. It was never it was never it was never it was never sharp. It was more, and it's because of this one. So just adjusting this will fix the C and all the loads all the way to the G. Now for this, sometimes you need to add some wax here in these tone holes and manipulate them so they lower a little bit, because they tend to be a little bit sharp sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to show you these ones. They open only a little bit in my E flat clarinet, and also this one that we add to almost all the high notes. This one, it opens just a little bit. So when I do, then I don't have to fight and play. I don't have to fight it to play lower because it is already in the tuning that is supposed to be. Okay, so I'm gonna go through these points a little bit faster because I'm running a little bit out of time. So the equipment guide, and I didn't write anything here, and I'm not gonna say anything because I I don't even want to tell you what I play, the brands of clarinet and mouthpiece and ligature and reeds that I use, because I think that it's very personal and you have to go on the search of what you want, of your sound, of your intonation, and you need to go by the timbre that your clarinet produces and your mouthpiece and your ligature. So I have only changed towards things that give me better intonation, better timbre, better control, better balance that I can use to play. So if this is a different barrel than the original, is because I needed something to tune even lower for the piano. And because most of the times I'm playing with the piano, I need to have my A is my reference. So I need to, and this is a piano 440, so I need to make most clarinets, most infra clarinets tune 442 and higher, and then we're always putting off our barrels and playing sharp. And then as I have to lower the intonation with my mouth, then I lose part of the timbre also. Okay, so the next question is, what kind of reeds do I use? Do I use B flat clarinets that I cut? Do I use a cut barrel like the one pictured here? Or do I use E flat clarinet reeds? And my answer is I use E flat clarinet reeds. So now they are smaller, but they are balanced. And nowadays we're lucky that we have go to a place that some brands have designed E-flat clarinet reeds that are good. So no, it didn't happen 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, I had to get a B-flat clarinet reed and then cut the bottom and then put it in my mouthpiece to use it. But it's not the same. So nowadays, I recommend for people to try the available E-flat clarinet reeds and use them. Or as a second option, get one of these barrels that have a little cut that can make your B-flat clarinet reed fit. Okay, so this takes me to a more philosophical part of this chat with you. That is, what are the career opportunities? And of course, it's good to play one of the accessory instruments, to play the E flat or the bass, because whenever it is needed, there is a job for you. So if you're good at the bass clarinet or the E flat clarinet, they're gonna call you whenever they need an instrument. So it's mostly in the orchestra that we have hiring opportunities, but also in bands. So I play many years in a band in Indiana that only met on summers, and I play there because they needed an infra clarinet player, and I was one available, and so they invited me. But besides the orchestra and the band, which both have the most of the repertory for the E flat clarinet, and they use it, then there is the clarinet quartet and the clarinet ensemble. So almost the most important music for clarinet quartet, especially by French and European composers, uh, uses the E flat. Sometimes along with two B flats and bass, and sometimes along with a B flat, an alto, or a basset horn, and a bass clarinet. So chamber music mostly you use the E flat clarinet in clarinet quartets, clarinet treats, and clarinet ensembles. So it's mostly what you use the E flat clarinet for, besides the orchestra and the band. So then other opportunities or the other possibilities include soloing, which I do a lot. Sometimes, uh, mostly in recitals with piano. Then there are the musicals that use most bass clarinet in that kind of book. They always have a number, book 3 or read 3 or reads 4, and it's a B flat clarinet, bass clarinet, and one of the saxophones. Sometimes the doublers have to play flute, or they have doublers for the double reeds, and also they usually include some of the saxophones, and sometimes they have a bassoon bass clarinet, baritone sax doubler, or a person. So this I haven't seen a lot of E flat clarinet in musicals, but from time to time there's one, and they need somebody to do it, or if not, it goes to the keyboard that is always playing one of those instruments. Okay, so I have an extensive list of repertory that I like and that I play. And some of these things have been written for me. Some of these things are just traditional repertory, and there I'm going to leave this document so the organizers of this workshop can share it to those interested. And my last part is, so how do I practice the E flat clarinet? And then I think, well, if I want to fight the natural tendencies, I need to do long tones. So I start with notes that are traditionally piercing, and since the challenge is to play them soft, I don't try to play loud. I try to play soft and control that kind of sound. So when I play, I can control that it doesn't get out of control. I can control that it stays covered and nice and projective, of course, but no like too bright. So because this is one of the things that I want to cultivate and I want to improve, so they don't remember people that the Ifra clarinet is a bright and loud instrument. Then I only do long tones that are soft and dark. So then I do the same exercises that I do for the B flat clarinet. So for the B flat clarinet, I do this. So I know where the partials are. And for the E flat clarinet, I do that. So I can fix the intonation and also remember, relocate where the partials are, but I also fix the intonation with that. So I do many. And I keep going, always with a high note. So So the D is a note that is not foreign to me. So when I want to play the D, I'm there because I'm already playing all the flexibility exercises. And then I just heard this last year. Why don't we just play the same B flat clarinet exercises on the E flat or on the bass? So scales, thirds, arpeggios, technical things. I put there the Jan Jan Vademecum because and one of the things that my fingers sometimes they don't find the keys because they're used to the B flat that is bigger. So I usually do something like scales because with the scales I recognize the length and the position of my fingers in the new keyboard in the E flat clarinet that's smaller. Okay, so that's why I do the same B flat clarinet scales and thirds and arpeggios because they are going to appear in the Dashes and Chloe E flat clarinet part or in the Mahler symphonies or in the Shostakovich, those chromatic scales. So, and then why not some rose or rosé also if in on the E flat clarinet. And then the last thing is there's a method book called no actually an orchestral help. It's the orchestral studies for the E flat clarinet by Peter Hadcock, who was the E flat clarinetist of the Boston Symphony for many years, and he wrote this book for E flat clarinet orchestral uh, excerpts, and then later he wrote one called The Working Clarinetist, that is more like equivalent to the Bonad that we use sometimes for the clarinet excerpts. So this is all I have today. So thank you very much again. If you have questions, please let me know. And if you have questions later, then you can email me or you can email Moria or Vanessa or Jessica so they will contact me afterwards.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation and so many great resources. Thank you so much. And we're going to pass it on to Cheyenne, and now we're going to go down in score order. So to the bass clarinet.
Yes, hi, thank you guys so much for having me, and thank you, Jorge, for all that enlightening E-flat clarinet information. Very interestingly, a lot of the things that I have to say about bass clarinet are very similar, even though they are on the opposite end of the spectrum. Approaching the auxiliary clarinets requires just some bravery and a little bit of flexibility. So let me share my screen here with you guys. I have a little presentation pulled up. So I might speed through this a little quickly, just so we don't go too far over time. It's so easy to talk about these instruments that we love so much. So I'm going to go quickly, and if there's anything in this presentation that you want me to expand upon or talk more about, feel free to put it in the chat, and either we can chat about it via email, or maybe we'll have some question and answer time at the end of this if we still have time. But I'm happy to expand on some of this, but let me just get through some of these points really quickly. Okay, so starting with just in general who I am and how I started playing bass clarinet. I'm Cheyenne Cruz. I am from Texas. I am born and bred a Texas band girl. So the first time that I ever played bass clarinet was in my college band. We were playing Frank Kelly's Blue Shades, and I just thought that that bass clarinet solo was really jazzy and really cool, and I was very attracted to the lower sounds of the instrument, and so I thought that's for me. And it was such a fun experience, and I really loved how big the range was and how big the sound was and how loud I could be. And it just really sparked a lot of joy for me. So that's sort of how I got into playing the bass clarinet in the first place. So that leads me to this idea of why learn bass clarinet at all. Well, first of all, if you do choose to tackle the beast and start to learn how to play bass clarinet, you're number one, diversifying your performance skill set, which makes you more marketable as a player. It makes you an easier person to place in different ensembles. A lot of the first experiences that I had playing with orchestras or playing with higher level bands was because I could play the bass clarinet. The reason that I got invited to play with the Dallas Winds for the very first time is because they needed someone to play bass clarinet, and that allowed me to have higher level musical experiences because I had that amount of diversity. So highly recommend you do that if you are looking to play with more groups or gain more musical experiences. Also, if you are in school, because I know that this is for the ICA Youth Committee, if you're in middle school, high school, or even in college, you can learn these auxiliary instruments on a school-owned horn before taking that plunge to purchase one yourself, because as we all know, these instruments are only getting more expensive, and bass clarinets can really cost a pretty penny. So I would advise you to start learning while you're still in school, because you can get your hands on a really nice instrument that otherwise might take you years to be able to afford once you're an adult. So that's a big advantage to starting earlier rather than later. And also, I think that playing the bass clarinet improves your soprano clarinet playing. I mean, first of all, look at this thing. It's huge. This is like 4 feet worth of tubing that you need to push your air through. So if you can make a big, supported, beautiful sound on an instrument like the bass clarinet, think of how strong your airstream is going to be when you go back to playing B-flat clarinet. So I highly recommend it. And number 2, it's just fun. Bass clarinet gets all the good parts, and it's the truth. We get to be the villains in movie scores. We get to play the cool bass lines in all sorts of like popular musics, and especially in orchestra or an opera orchestra, we always get to accompany either the funny things that happen or the very heart-wrenching tumultuous things that happen in the story. So it's a blast to play bass clarinet, and I just can't recommend it enough. So number one, when you first approach the bass clarinet, I would recommend to get to know the instrument. First of all, you have to respect the key work. Just first of all, take a look at it. Like, you can see that there are some really long pieces of metal on this, very long keys. And so you can see that even though it is a big instrument, you have to be very delicate with it, because if any of this stuff gets bent or pushed, the whole instrument can stop working. So number one, respect the key work and respect that even though she is a beast, she is a delicate beast. And honestly, the truth is, bass clarinets just go out of adjustment all the time. And you, as the player, are the first line of defense. So if you know what the mechanisms are supposed to look like, if you know how the mechanisms are supposed to function, you can nip a lot of the adjustment issues right in the bud. So one of the, just to go super quickly here, the mechanisms that you should get to know on your bass clarinet is this double register mechanism, right? On soprano clarinet, you have one register key, and when you push it, it pops the clarinet up into the next partial. But for bass clarinet, we have, whenever you push the register key, this is so lovely and easy to show on Zoom, you have this first register key that opens up here on the neck, and you can see that there are, several little mechanisms involved in opening that key. But if you depress a few keys on the right hand, namely the D/G key on the right hand with the third, your ring finger on the right hand, it will actually cause this other register vent to open up. Hopefully you can see that going there. Right, so there are some weird little voicing things that happen when you play in that lower end of the clarion instrument that might be very difficult if any of those very delicate mechanisms are out of adjustment. So it's good and important to get to know what they are supposed to look like so you can notice if it goes out. I would definitely avoid touching any of those long rods or those long keys during assembly when you put your bass clarinet together for the first time, especially if it's new, because it might have some really tight corks on there, or if it's just been overhauled or something like that. You might have to really work hard to put it together, especially if you're not the strongest or most muscular person in the world like me. But so my recommendation is to always put the butt of your hand in a place where there are not keys, right? So if you're going to push down, make sure that you are holding the instrument like maybe down here where there aren't any mechanisms that you can mess up, especially you don't want to grab here on the long rods, and certainly not here where all of these delicate pinky keys are. But it is okay to push down keys that are meant to be put down, right? Like this key is meant to be depressed. When I put my bass clarinet together, I hold it about there, pushing down keys that it's okay to depress, but staying away from these long rods. And if you do simple stuff like that, your bass clarinet will be much happier and it will go out of adjustment a lot less. Another means of keeping your bass clarinet from going out of adjustment too much is to make sure that you store your instrument in such a way that the keys are facing up. I always say make your keys face the heavens to my students, because if you store it standing up sometimes, or certainly if the keys are facing down to the ground, that can depress the rods in strange ways and cause your keys to go out of alignment. So it can be really difficult. So the best thing to do is, and even if it is not the most ideal for whatever your storage space is, you're gonna just end up paying a lot less to repair people if you store your bass clarinet with the keys facing up. So the other thing is, the bass clarinet is just going to go out of adjustment, especially if you live in an area where the climate changes a lot. I live in Texas, and even just today it was like 40 degrees this morning, and it's 80 something degrees outside right now. So if you live in a tumultuous climate like that, be ready to check a few specific points to make adjustments depending on the weather and the humidity and such. Number one is the register mechanism that I talked about. One of the ways that you can adjust the register mechanism is, hopefully you can see right here, there is a tiny little rod that pushes this mechanism down. And this mechanism, this key has sort of a long T shape to it. See right there? And depending on the humidity and the weather, if you adjust that just a little, most of the time I try to put it right in the middle, but if it's really rainy outside, for some reason, if I just adjust it slightly to the left, it makes all of my notes just speak a little bit better. So being ready and flexible enough to make those tiny adjustments can really make a big difference. The other places you can check are the bridge key and at the low C mechanism, if your horn has a low C key. And if anybody wants to ask about that afterwards, I can sort of show you where my adjustment points personally are. But for the sake of time, let's keep going. All right, so another thing that's really important to know about your bass clarinet is that your neck style influences your playing position. So here I've got pictured two different styles of bass clarinet necks. Figure 1A is a curved neck, which you see on a lot of buffets. This is what I have because I play on a buffet bass clarinet. And if you have that sort of deeply curved bass clarinet neck, then it's important to know that when you're playing seated, that your bass clarinet should be perpendicular to the ground, right? Just straight up and down. You don't need an angle. A lot of people you may have seen play with an sort of angle or with the bell between their knees. But if you are lucky enough to have one of these curved necks for your horn, you don't need to do that. So just the bass clarinet is perpendicular to the ground. That puts it at the correct angle for playing. And you do not need a neck strap if you are playing seated with that style of neck. For the other style of neck, this figure 1B, is more of a flat neck, and it almost wants to come in at an angle like a saxophone. that you would play. You see this on a lot of Selmers, although Selmer offers the curved neck too. It just sort of depends on what you buy. But if you are playing on a bass clarinet with that flatter style neck, you will want to play at an angle. And in fact, I usually suggest to my students that have flatter neck bass clarinets that they put the bell sort of just behind their heels. And so you get this more acute angle that mimics what a soprano clarinet angle would be coming out of your mouth. And it is also really helpful to have a neck strap to play even when you're seated, because you can imagine all the sort of back problems you might cause yourself, or the tension problems you might have in your left hand if you're playing one of those flat necks without a neck strap or without some sort of harness. Personally, when I stand, or if I am playing a flat neck bass clarinet, I just use a bassoon harness. My husband is a bassoonist, and he's the gearhead in the family, so he buys stuff and I just steal it from him. But it works great for bass clarinet. So some sort of harness or neck strap is really important if you are playing on an instrument with a flat neck like that, and you do want to play at an angle. When you're playing standing, if that's a possibility for you, the flat neck, you might want to have, more of a wide stance so that the bell can go in between your knees when you play. And then with a more curved neck bass clarinet, you can sort of keep it more perpendicular to the ground as if you were playing seated. Okay, another important part of bass clarinet life to understand is dealing with adjustment screws. So I think it is really important for every bass clarinetist or aspiring bass clarinetist to have a set of tiny screwdrivers. You can get a bunch of these for like $1 at any local convenience store, Walmart, Target, anything like that. Just little baby screwdrivers that allow you to access some of these adjustment screws. Most bass clarinetists, even lower end student models, will have adjustment screws, and they allow you to fix adjustment issues. They allow you to mess with the intonation, like Jorge was talking about when he was discussing adding some wax to certain keys so that you can adjust the key height so that keys, that notes speak a little bit better or they have better intonation. You can do that on the bass clarinet, and it's really handy that they've got these little screws just built right in. Like you can see this one right here that affects my F sharp key. And so if I screw that in, it just adjusts the height to go higher or lower, that you can personalize your own instrument and intonation in that way. Now, adjustment screws aren't necessarily something that you have to take to a repair person to do. You can feel comfortable messing with them yourself. Of course, whenever you are turning your adjustment screws, remember that it is a trial and error process, and to go slowly and do small adjustments. If you just turn a quarter of a turn at a time, play your instrument, see if it feels better or worse. If it's better, great, leave it. If it's going in the right direction, turn it another quarter turn more. Or if it got worse, stop, turn the adjustment screw back, and no harm, no foul. You really can't hurt your bass clarinet by messing with the adjustment screws, but just know that it is a trial and error process, and to be really gentle and only do a little bit at a time. So I've got pictured here a couple of instances of adjustment screws, but if you look on the bass clarinets that you might have access to, you can see that they're all over the place. And once again, happy to show you guys more that are on my horn that might be interesting to you. Or if you find that you have pads that don't close, or frequently one that's always a problem. I just taught a bass clarinet masterclass this morning, and this fixed her issue, is this interplay between the B flat and the B natural key. You have two adjustment screws, right there, and they have to be balanced in order for it to work. So if you feel like you have trouble playing like clarion Fs, F sharps, or chalumeau B flats and Bs, like they don't speak or they're super funky sharp or something, you might have an issue with your adjustment screws, and it's easy as just messing around with that with a tiny little screwdriver. So that can make your bass clarinetting experience much better. So another big part of bass clarinet playing is managing your air and using that air to produce a beautiful tone quality. So I agree with Jorge here that every time you start a practice session, you should begin it with a long tone. It's the best way to develop your tone quality, especially if you are changing over from B flat soprano to a new instrument. You just want to get used to how that bigger or smaller mouthpiece might feel, how your tongue position might adjust, and how you might need more air in order to make a good tone quality. And spoiler alert, you need much more air for the bass clarinet to make a sound. So, tone quality exercises are a wonderful time to push the limits of your air capacity. You know, always you want to be pushing the envelope of how long can you sustain a phrase, how loud can you play a note, how softly can you play a note without any awkward things happening in your support system. So pictured here, I have a little long tone exercise that I like to do on my bass clarinet that allows me to focus on my tone quality and intonation. And I believe we have like a PDF handout to give to everybody that's sort of just a PDF version of this presentation that I have for you. So if you're interested in looking a little more closely at some of these exercises, I have a PDF for you. So just let me know at the end of the session here. Additionally, voicing is very different on the bass clarinet. Because of that double register mechanism that we talked about, you have more subtle voicing positions, especially in the clarion. I actually think like altissimo bass clarinet is not very hard because it's similar tongue positions to soprano clarinet. So you might be surprised that those altissimo notes pop right out for you. I find that most students, when they're first switching over to bass clarinet, have the most trouble with the clarion register, sort of like, you know, when you go over the break to B, C, D, especially here where that second register mechanism is engaged, and then going on up into the top of the staff area, that's probably the place where the voicing is most difficult. So generally, your voicing positions and your tongue positions are going to be slightly lower in the back of your tongue than on soprano clarinet because we just need a little more space. But as always with voicing, I think it's important to just try out different tongue positions and vowels that work for you. Vowel sounds that would not be appropriate on clarinet, like O or aw. For low-end bass clarinet, those are the vowel sounds you want to use, where that would sound terrible on your B flat and probably sound even worse on E flat clarinet. Those are the vowel sounds that you need, especially when you're playing much below the staff on the bass clarinet. And I find that most people, when they're switching over from soprano clarinet, typically have too much bite or their tongue positions are too high, and so they're getting lots of squeaks or higher tones. So the answer to that is to use a more open vowel position and to open up your teeth and open up your jaw a little bit and to be as tall as possible between the tip of your nose and the tip of your chin while being able to still form your embouchure. So these are selections from a bass clarinet book by Volta. He is a French bass clarinetist. It's called The Bass Clarinet. I've got the source at the end of this if you are interested in finding that book. It was really instrumental in helping me become a great bass clarinetist, so it's got a lot of really wonderful material in there. But these are some of the vowel positions that he uses for the different registers of the clarinet. So if you want to take a look at that PDF on your own time when you're practicing long tones and voicing, this is a really helpful resource. And once again, if anybody has questions, we can go over it a little more later. How am I doing? All right, we're gonna keep going. I'm going fast, guys. So the next couple of slides are about some particular exercises that you can do as you start to approach the bass clarinet for the first time, or if you find yourself needing to play in an orchestra, or if someone hands you a bass clarinet and says, hey, we need this part covered, it's your job, here we go. Not only can the voicing vowels that I used earlier help you produce that beautiful sound, but here are some other thoughts. Number one, the no register key exercise is a great way to figure out whether you're voicing properly in the clarion register or not. For example, if you play a high C, and then you allow the register key to come off by slipping your thumb down and just finger as if you were fingering an F. If you can maintain that sound without it slipping down into the low F partial, you know that you're voicing a C correctly. And you can just go down the instrument like that. And if you find yourself slipping into the lower partial, for example, like that, then you may know that your tongue position is too low and you might experiment with a higher voicing vowel to make that happen. Additionally, this exercise I like to call target practice. Helps students have good voicing for note starts, especially in that low clarion range that we were talking about. It can be very difficult to start on like, you know, E, F, G, or A there at the top of the staff. A lot of people are afraid to begin phrases up there. So using this exercise called target practice, which essentially has you tongue 4 legato notes, 4 staccato notes that are ended with air, 4 staccato notes that are ended with tongue, like a tongue stop, and then accents on those same notes. You can practice starting those difficult clarion register notes on your own like that, for example. And you can practice making all of those happen in a clean and structured way so that you don't have to be afraid of starting notes in that ugly register. Another thing that I find a lot of people are kind of afraid of when they approach bass clarinet for the first time is navigating the extra keys. Depending on your instrument make and model, which they can all be very different, I would suggest number one, make a diagram of your own instrument. Because even models within the same instrument making company can vary greatly depending on if they only have a low E flat key or if they have several thumb keys. My bass clarinet has 3 different ways to finger a low D, which can get really complicated, but is also really convenient. So I suggest swallowing your pride a little bit and just drawing yourself a diagram like I've done here for my personal bass clarinet, so you can get to know which keys actually make what note come out. I've taught several very, very talented high school bass clarinetists who have no idea where the D key is because they've never used it because they don't often see it in their music. And I'm like, man, the band director paid a whole lot of money for those extra keys. You should at least know where they go. So just having an idea of which key makes which note speak and having a little diagram that you can reference is a really great way to start navigating those extra keys with confidence. Personally, I like to get to know my keys via a box drill, which I've got pictured here. And once again, I have on the PDF if anybody wants to access those. But essentially all it is you start on a low G and you just go in a box around the different pinky keys just to get to know them and to get your pinky used to navigating all of that large area. And also because these keys are pretty difficult to depress, right? Like this key moves all of these pads and it's kind of an intense mechanism. So really this is kind of just like muscle building for your pinkies and for your forearms that are moving your fingers to make this happen. So this is a bit of a gym workout for your pinky, but essentially it starts like this. And you can do that for your left pinky. You can also do that for your thumb if you are not a bassoonist. Maybe you've never used your thumb to play, your right thumb at least, to play notes before. So it's a good way to get to know your thumb keys too. Personally, I have 3 thumb keys, so mine sounds like this. And so you can start to have some confidence in using those extended keys for the pinkies and thumb. So, all the helpful resources that I've got listed here today, the bass clarinet, or the French title La Clarinette basse by Jean-Marc Volta, is a wonderful book, and it's great for any bass clarinetist starting out. Heck, I still practice out of it now. So that's a wonderful book. Earspasm.com, which is Michael Lowenstern's bass clarinet performance / pedagogy blog, is super helpful. If you don't know Michael Lowenstern, the bass clarinetist, I highly recommend you get into his music and his pedagogy on YouTube. It's super duper helpful. He explains things about bass clarinet in a really easy to understand and fun way. And also, if you're interested in gaining more technique on your bass clarinet, Arnold Martin wrote the Bass Clarinet Scale book, which is published by Aztec Press, and it's really fantastic. If you are ever interested in taking your scales all the way down to low C, that's one of the only books that I've found that has those scalar Behrman style exercises that go all the way down to low C, so that you can actually put those keys that you paid for to good use. So those are the resources that I frequently use as a bass clarinetist, and that hopefully they will be helpful to you. And as always, if you have any bass clarinet questions, please feel free to contact me. My email's right there. Also, that will be on the PDF that's handed out if you are interested in that. But that's my quick version of the presentation. I guess we should open it up for questions.
Cheyenne, we actually already have a question in the chat.
Oh, right.
Richard is asking, where would you say voicings change if a student has a bass that doesn't have the double register?
That's a great question, right? So if you have a bass clarinet, like a student model bass clarinet that doesn't have that double register key, I would say that the voicing changes right around like clarion G. That's where on the soprano clarinet, like if the kid has started on soprano clarinet, that they are used to inching their tongue position higher to get up to C, to use that faster airstream. But for the bass clarinet, that voicing difference is a little more subtle. So I find that most people often overshoot that, right? So when you're going up, right, I change a little, but it's very subtle. And I think most people either bite too much or use their tongue too high. And will pop up into that higher partial. So the difference is very subtle. And so I, once again, would either start them with those tongue start exercises, just so they can experiment with what voicing position works in those notes. And also, sometimes those notes just don't get put in band music very much. So frequently beginner bass clarinetists will not encounter them very much. So they're sort of just afraid to go up there. So sometimes all they need is just more repetitions of starting notes and playing up there so that they realize it's not nearly as scary as they think.
Does anyone have any additional questions for either Jorge or Cheyenne at this time? Go ahead and type them in the chat if you'd like. All right, well, it looks like in this incredible presentation, we have answered all the questions that anyone might have had. So that's what we want, that's what we love. Oh, one last one came in right at the last second. The best bass clarinet literature for high school students.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think the classic bass clarinet solo that I think is great for high school kids is Eugene Boza's Ballade. That's a standard, but I also think that there are some really wonderful pieces by Daniel Dorff. Number one, I believe it's called something to do with St. Francis.
Flowers of St. Francis.
Flowers of St. Francis. That's a fantastic one. And anything written by Daniel Dorff is immediately approachable, but also challenging for a high school student. But as Daniel plays the bass clarinet, I think that they're written really idiomatically, so they're not super challenging.
All right, Jorge and Cheyenne, thank you so much. Do either of you have anything additional you want to leave us with? Or if not, thank you so much for doing this. And thank you again to Mariah, Lucas, and Luis, also the subcommittee that planned these April workshops. And thank you all of you for attending. I think we can all agree we all got a lot of great information, and we are very grateful to Cheyenne and Jorge for their time today and for their preparation and playing as well. Please take a moment to complete the workshop feedback poll as well that is posted in the chat to let us know what you think. And then do not miss the next workshop. Got to plug the next one, right? Saturday, May 15th, when Jackie McElwain from the University of Southern Mississippi, Linda Chatterton, not a clarinet player, a writer, researcher, and performer, and Ani Berberian of the Buffet Group USA artist and clinician will address performance anxiety. So again, thank you so much, Jorge and Cheyenne. It was a true pleasure. And we look forward to seeing all of you again in 2 weeks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Pleasure. Bye.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all.